Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we remember the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The public celebration of services were held today at the 10,000 seat House of Hope in Chicago. There were speeches, song, and tributes, and we are examining his life and legacy. My guests are Harvard University political science professor Dr. Marcus Board and Justin Hansford, Harvard University School of Law professor and executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. Wanted to let our listeners know that this segment of the Insight segment actually recorded earlier in the day, literally at this very moment. Those services at the House of Hope in Chicago are going on right now. We do have some parts of that service as we could bring them to you, but this is a 3-hour service. And and you know what? I don't believe, Marcus, that they are going to make 3 hours because this is
minimum 3.
a minimum.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, House of Hope, 10,000 seat facility, and every seat is filled. Every seat is filled. I think I want to start, first of all, with you, Justin, as we just kind of look back just over the events of the past several weeks. Jesse Jackson died during Black History Month, certainly very appropriate. Talk to me about, when you think about Jesse Jackson, what is the thing that comes to mind for you?
Well, for me, it's an honor to be able to talk about his life and legacy, because he's one of these people who was a bridge. And I keep coming back to that word because clearly during the time between the assassination of Dr. King and the election of President Obama, it's hard to argue that there was a more influential figure in Black America than Reverend Jackson. And he was someone who, when he said, keep hope alive, he really was in the process of keeping that dream alive in the hearts of many of our community. And we're talking about people who, had to go through Reaganomics, had to go through the attacks on the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party, and, had to go through the 90s with mass incarceration. These were really difficult times in Black America. And at that time, we had a figure who you could talk to and say, well, what is the agenda for Black America? What should, when there were issues that impacted Black people, people could go and say, well, call Reverend Jesse Jackson. There was clear leadership in the community, and it was recognized as a reality both in the African American community and writ large. People knew who he was, and they now, of course, towards the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, I think things, the way he was viewed shifted over time. But I think if we go back throughout the 20th century, these were very difficult times, and he was there. He showed up. He showed up for people in need. He showed up in the international sphere. He showed up in the highest levels of political aspiration. He showed up in the churches. He was there. So I have to say that I was a bit younger, so I wasn't there for the entire time. But it's still inspiring to see, especially Reverend Jackson in the 70s with the afro and the sideburns that came up right under his ear. So just I don't know if you saw that clip of him on Sesame Street talking to the young children, telling them that I believe in myself, and I think that he is someone who is going to be remembered in a much less cynical way than he was viewed during his lifetime, especially in the late 80s and the 90s, the 2000s, where there was so much press that was, I would even dare to say, denigrating him.
Mm.
I think as we go back and look at his contribution in his life in its entirety, there's so much more of great value for us to reflect on. So I'm really happy that that seems to be the mood of the country right now. There seems to be much more talk about his contributions and much less talk about his weaknesses. With, you know, in 2026, we look at the weaknesses of political leadership today. I mean, it pales into comparison.
What,
I mean,
whatever do you mean by that? No,
I know. You know, the things
I don't
that
know
he
what
was
you're talking
pilloried for,
about.
the things that he was pilloried for, you know, nowadays, you know, who's the people in political leadership today do that on a daily basis, and you know, it's almost excused. So it's a very interesting moment in our history.
Let me ask you this, Marcus, because you call Chicago home, and it is not an understatement. I'm sorry, it's not an overstatement to say that Reverend Jackson was a citizen of the world, but Chicago was home. They mentioned that today during the services. For you, I'm sure it has special meaning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that I did, the community organizing with the young people in Chicago, happened directly across the street from Rainbow Push, which is
Hmm.
over there on 47th Street. And there's a church right next to it, First Baptist Church of Chicago. I think it's been there since 18 something. Reverend Jesse Brown, a different Reverend Jesse. And so we did a lot of our work there. And while we didn't always partner with Push, it was this big, it cast a big shadow. It was a constant reminder that there are Black people here doing something for the people in this city and around the world. I think Reverend Jesse, to Justin's point, had a complicated legacy. Um, I think history has trouble remembering Black political figures. You think about John Lewis, think about Medgar Evers, you think about Jesse Jackson, you think about these folks who were pillars in American politics that, you know, it's easy to blame us for not succeeding in the same ways when things go bad. And I hope that Jesse's memory, the good of it, is really focused on a lot of the work that he did negotiating peace around the world, in the Middle East, going across, getting hostages freed. I think some of that work was some of the most profound work that he ever did. Of course, his 84 and 88 elections were transformative for the study of Black politics, for better or worse. We got the National Black Election Studies through the funding that came from Jesse Jackson, whose campaign manager was Ron Walters, a longtime Howard University professor. So there's a lot of Black history tied into the political work that he did. And while no one's, you know, in politics, we know no one's a perfect figure. And Jesse, you know, not without his flaws, I think the work that he did on the whole is something that we should remember fondly, and we have to figure out ways to do that. I think the bigger challenge is what is what are we losing now? What world is now closed now that he's
Mm.
gone? And where are we going from here? Because the world that he came in, that he, you know, cut his teeth on, where he earned his stripes, that world is gone. And it's been gone for some time, but it's really, you know, officially cemented. And now we have to think about what does Black politics in the future look like. So I have an event next week talking about that. If you want to pull up to Harvard,
Mm.
you know.
Okay. I want you both to listen to something from the services today at House of Hope, and then I want you to react to this.
Again, everybody, as we celebrate Reverend Jackson's life, let's again welcome President Joe Biden and Dr. Jill Biden. Let's celebrate them. Again, let's celebrate President Bill Clinton and Secretary Hillary Clinton. Can we celebrate again President Barack Obama? And can we show our love for Vice President Kamala Harris?
Justin, other than the fact that all of the people just named are Democrats, what is the thing that is striking to you?
Well, a couple of things. One, it's been said so many times that there's no Obama election without Jesse Jackson's groundwork. I have Charles Houston behind me, who is really the one who set the stage for Thurgood Marshall, and you see the work of President Obama. To me, it's a similar dynamic. Their relationship, of course, much more complex. Was one of those situations where we may never really truly understand how many layers there were to their relationship. I have no doubt that Reverend Jackson's runs in '84 and '88 clearly did something to change the way future President Obama felt about himself and his aspirations. If you just follow the trajectory of his life, President Obama in the early '80s versus the late '80s, from a pot smoking kid at Occidental to someone at the president of Harvard Law Review, who many people said even then was already having presidential aspirations in Chicago. I mean, there's no way we can fully grasp the impact that I'm sure Jesse Jackson had on President Obama, although he doesn't speak about it as profusely as he might, in my view. I'm sure that impact is significant. And the relationship, we know that Reverend Jackson had also a relationship with President Clinton and Hillary Clinton. That was something that I saw even in my teenage years in the '90s. Prof may have more insight into that relationship. But the things he did in the '90s are truly underrated. I mean, so much in his legacy seems to hinge around his 1984 and 1988 presidential campaigns. But the work he did, the international work, the advocacy work he did in the '90s and in the '70s, I believe, are truly underrated. And I hope that as people continue to discuss his legacy, they put those decades into context, because they really show a level of political maturity, political influence that very few African Americans had achieved in the 20th century, especially in the '90s.
Marcus, your thoughts about that presidential roll call that we heard?
A few things. First, shout out to Otis Moss III, who is the lead pastor at Trinity Baptist Church in Chicago. That's whose voice we were listening to. A few things I noticed. Did I hear Michelle Obama? Did I miss that? Is she there?
We did not hear.
I did not hear that, did I?
Yeah.
I thought I might not have heard her.
You know what? I didn't think about that.
I did not hear Michelle. Michelle, shout out to Michelle, native Chicagoan. But no, I think one of the things that we do talk about, as Justin said, Jesse Jackson was essential for Barack Obama to exist, despite their complicated relationship. Another thing that gets said less often, and is a testament to the fact that Bill and Hillary are there, is that Bill Clinton doesn't win if Jesse Jackson doesn't run. He shows that with the Southern strategy, he is able to garner enough black votes to win enough seats to be able to hold several states. I think he won about 5, and he was competitive in about 13 states. To be able to be viable in an election while paying attention intentionally to black people. So I think what Jesse Jackson does is show the way for black elected officials to then push ahead and try and get a Kamala Harris as a vice president, to try and get a Ketanji Brown Jackson in the Supreme Court, to show this party that, hey, if you don't do this with black people, first of all, you're going to lose forever, which they may be committed to nowadays, even though they weren't for about a decade and a half. And if you don't get black people, then you're going to have an agenda, a political agenda that is deeply, deeply, deeply committed to the same types of racism and authoritarianism we have today. And so this is why, again, one of the big challenges with Jesse Jackson's legacy is, well, we're back here anyway, so was it worth it? And so now we're getting into this question about keep hope alive, right? Can we keep hope alive? Miriam Kaba, more recently, she's a prominent abolitionist, talks about hope being a discipline. Can we commit to hope? And I will say, I have a few friends. Chrissy Greer wrote a couple articles in the New York Times, guest opinion articles in the New York Times, saying basically, we tired. We
Hmm.
tired of this. We tired of fighting this way. There is one ongoing question about the legacy of the Bill and Hillary Clintons, who were just in the Epstein depositions,
Mhm.
about the Barack and Michelle Obamas, who the Obama Center on the South Side is having to have a community benefits agreement to make sure that when they put this library there, that they're not displacing Black families, and they
Hmm.
signed it after
Hold that
years of
point.
work.
Hold that point. I don't want you to forget what you're going to say, but
You
I
good?
do need to take a really quick break. Don't forget you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR-FM. The conversation about the life and legacy of the Reverend Jesse Jackson continues on Sirius XM Channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the life and legacy of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Services being held today, the public services being held today at the House of Hope in Chicago. My guests are Howard University political science professor Dr. Marcus Board and Justin Hansford, Howard University School of Law professor and executive director of Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. Dr. Board, right before the break, you were making a point. Please go ahead and continue.
Sure. So the point generally is that Clinton and Obama and Jesse Jackson, to a certain extent, were holding off the horde. They were fighting back from what we're seeing with Trumpism. And the question that a lot of us are facing today is whether or not that work was in vain. And so, this notion of keeping hope alive, of hope being a discipline, is one that we have to take very seriously as universities are being torn apart, as media is being torn down, as the norms and expectations that we have in our American life are really being challenged, and whether or not we've been oblivious to the experiences of so many people. The rich are getting richer. And, I think on this day, with these famous folks in the middle of Chicago with 10,000 people around them, I wonder if this type of reverence is outdated and if we need to rethink it. I don't know.
You make such an interesting point, because even as you were speaking, and I was thinking about some of the campaign slogans, of course, with Jackson, keep hope alive. Barack Obama's, the audacity of hope. Even Bill Clinton, that the theme song, don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Okay. When you compare those three, iconic politicians to even a President Trump, and this is the only thing I'm going to say about President Trump in this, is that, having covered both Trump, campaigns, there was a darkness to his campaigns, to his rhetoric that we have seen even in his presidencies, Justin. And so what about what Marcus is saying? Is the future of American politics post Jesse Jackson darkness, when there was so much light and hope in those three campaigns that as I mentioned?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm thinking more about the future of the Democratic Party, one that is at a crossroads, because it seems clear to me that the Democratic Party has not chosen the pathway of hope, and that's one of the reasons. So the message that Jesse Jackson stands for, the Rainbow Coalition and all of these concepts were very unapologetically taking King's vision and bringing it forth into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s. But today, most people I know, most of my students in class are asking themselves, what is the Democratic Party's vision, right? And if we had to push ourselves, we may say You have a very moderate wing of the Democratic Party, which in many ways President Biden represented, which has not put forward a vision that's nearly as progressive as what Reverend Jackson wanted. And you have another wing of the party, the AOC wing, and also Bernie, which seems to have been the closest heir to that vision, but had been, for the last 10 years at least, marginalized in the Democratic Party. And so right now, it's just 2028 is upon us. We're going to have to figure out what is the counter argument. We didn't know what the Democratic Party's counter argument was for the last couple of years. And it seemed like in the aftermath of, our current president, the greatest counter argument was we're not him. The counter argument was not we are putting forward a rainbow coalition. The counter argument is not that we have hope and we're going to keep hope alive. We're certainly not creating a beloved community. All of these very audacious, bold visions that Reverend Jackson represented were not the Democratic Party's vision. The vision was simply we're trying to hold on to normalcy. And so that inspiration, even if you go back to that time period, I'd love to hear what the professor said. It seems like mostly we're talking about these hopeful visions coming from one particular party when it comes to inclusion and a rainbow vision of the future. But that party's politics have not allowed for that recently. Now, whether we are going to see something that can approach this type of charismatic figure again, like what Jesse Jackson represented, that I really have a lot of questions about that, because the way media works today, the way politics works today, commentary, people, social media in particular, I really don't envision a similar figure emerging in the near future. I can't even imagine who that would be. And so I'm very much in the dark as to how we will ever see anything similar to Reverend Jackson again for American politics, let alone this question of Black politics, right? I've spoken to others in the past. Who is the Black political leader today that we can look at to say they will serve as the voice of the Black community? If we have a crisis, we've had crises, racial justice crises in the 80s, 90s. We all looked at Jesse Jackson, called Jesse Jackson, right? That was the first person you called. Who would you call today? We don't have a figure like that. And again, I do not know, and I do not envision in the short term that there will emerge a figure that will approximate that type of unitary, charismatic leadership just in the Black community, let alone the Democratic Party or the nation as a whole.
Yeah.
So it really is a turning point.
When I think, Marcus, about the accomplishments of Jesse Jackson as it relates to my own personal experience, both of you are, a bit younger than I, but certainly even as a very young child, I knew who Jesse Jackson was during the 70s, but his impact for my generation, I think, for my contemporaries, was the 84 presidential run, where there was so much focus on voter registration. And I remember even being in college, just even on the college campus and even in the greater community, how Jackson convinced people who never thought about voting registered. Some 7 million people. I cannot say that there's been that kind of singular accomplishment by a politician. That to me is groundbreaking. And then again, as a very young journalist, back when he was running in 88, to have an opportunity to interview him. And the reality is, as much time as he spent in Chicago, he spent a lot of time in DC too, Marcus. So
Yeah, I think I'm going to ask the hard question,
Mm,
which is, in many ways, Martin Luther King's dream got shortened. It got constrained and circumscribed. It got narrowed to be a political ambition for
Mm,
middle class and upwardly mobile Black people.
mm,
We chased this dream and we achieved it in Barack Obama's election. And the question now moving forward is, what's next? We had the Cosby, that was the Cosby era, right? This is the Jesse era. This is the opportunity era where we were fighting for something, we were pushing for something, and then we got it in a lot of ways. Obviously, Black people are not dominating, things. Not that that was ever the goal, but we've not fully accomplished anything, or not anything that they couldn't just take away in one fell swoop, as we've seen in this Trump era. But there's a way in which we have put all of our hopes and our dreams and all of our eggs in this basket of education, of upward mobility, of advancing things. And again, I think this is going to be the challenge that we have as people who want to make sure that we remember the truth about Jesse Jackson, which is, in his time, in his context, he was pushing forward on the lines that were drawn for us, which is to say, he was doing the work that needed to be done when it needed to be done. We did the best we could through this era, but now we have to rethink it. We have to think about what's next. We had a movement for Black Lives. The movement did not really turn to Jesse. The
mhm,
movement didn't turn to Al Sharpton. The movement didn't turn to these figures. The movements turned inward. They turned to young people. They turned to
mm.
queer folks and feminists, right? They turned to a leaderful movement. And so I think there's this challenge, right? To your point, Harold, there is an entire generation that says, hey, you need to respect the work that we did. And they're right, right? In the same way that we respected Paul Robeson, but history kind of forgets him because why? He turned communist. Or we respect Jackie Robinson, but we ignore when he supported Nixon, right? We try and do this work where we ensure the legacies of our people and do so without lying and without pretending that what worked then will work now. Now, I'm not a hero of the world. I don't have all the answers, but I will say that more Black people are in college now than have ever been, and we still don't have jobs. We still don't have
Mm.
jobs. We still have significant debt. We still don't have community wealth. We don't have intergenerational wealth. We still have all these problems. In fact, the wealth gap is as high today as it was in 1968.
mm.
That's
So,
true. Yes.
Sure,
you
yeah.
know, we were at a 30-year low in the 90s, and then it did climb right back up. And so I think it's a complicated legacy that I think we need to control for what's going on in the world around us, and just say, listen, in this, and this is why study is so important to me. It's important to understand that in their time, you can understand the importance of a particular figure. And I think Jesse is one of those folks. I think he meant something to you. I think he meant something to all of us. And I think he uplifted us in ways that we can never imagine. And now, as we turn the page, we got to write the next chapter.
Well, and I'll say this, Marcus. One of the other things when you talk about the Rainbow Coalition, and you look at his speech in '88, and not the speech, but who was in the audience, where I would argue that never before had we had someone so publicly attract everyone, every kind of person, and where it wasn't just black and white people.
Yeah.
It was, and we weren't even using the term LGBTQ plus back then. But
Mm-mm.
there were Latinos, there were Asian people, there were old people, there were young people. He really was, you could argue, the first presidential candidate who was focused on bringing everyone into one big tent.
Hmm.
And to the point that you were making earlier, there would not have been a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama prior to, if there hadn't been a Jesse Jackson. And now everybody is siloed. everyone is siloed, and what whatabouting.
Mm.
There's so much whatabouting when we talk about issues from one side or the other. And I think for those students of history, as I would consider both of you to be, Justin, what kind of country do you think America would be if Jesse Jackson had become president?
Well, that's the question. I have to say, to answer your question and also to reflect on what Prof just said, if you look at leadership from the perspective of the tangible solving of problems, the tangible increase of well-being for the community, we did have mass incarceration and the war on drugs. We continue to have police brutality. Even before Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, we've had things in the 90s. We had the riots and we had all these things that took place. And if we were to truly try to measure the actual progress, the actual tangible success of Black leadership in the 80s and 90s, it got us through. We don't know how bad it could have been, but let's not sugarcoat history. We had a lot of real crises that did damage to us during that time period. So we can't say that the leadership during that time period was just a wild success. That's not, and that's where some of that criticism comes out of. People were doing the best they could, and they were not in office. Talking about Reverend Jackson, he was not the president. If he was the president of the United States, in '88, if he won that election, do we have mass incarceration throughout the early '90s into the 2000s? Could he have stopped that? I mean, from what we know about the forces that were at play, I'm not sure he could have stopped that. But maybe there's a different history for, when I was a kid in the 90s. I remember growing up in DC, they were saying 1 in 3 Black men in DC would spend time in jail or in prison. When I graduated from high school in '99, that was the statistic they had for me, right? So could he have altered that trajectory if he was elected president in '88? What would that have done in the following election? Would he have gone up against George W. Bush again? How would that have changed the Republican Party and Newt Gingrich and all of these people who set the stage really for what we have today? Setting the stage for the Tea Party, setting the stage for MAGA. A lot of things were happening in the 90s that were turning points in our nation's history. How could he have changed those things? I don't have a clear answer for that. That's all hypothetical. But I do think that as we celebrate his contribution, it is important for us to think critically about those years in our country and what actually happened and how it affects where we are today. I think that is a useful exercise because ultimately it was not all, as we know, there were many things that happened that were tragic during that time period. And we, perhaps we need to think more closely about how we can respond. Some of those things have never been responded to. We're still trying to get our way out of mass incarceration. The incarceration rate is going down, but we're still trying to re-enter that generation into society now in their 50s and 60s and later on in life. We have a re-entry clinic here at the law school filled with people who were in jail for marijuana and all of these low level drug crimes. Even from the 90s, those people are still facing those problems. So it's just it's a counterfactual, and those are always impossible to answer. But we have to be honest that those were difficult years for our country and for our people. And the leadership at the time was fighting, but of course they did not ultimately reach the pinnacle of success. But we have to be thankful for what they were able to contribute.
So here's the other side of that question, Marcus. Without a Jesse Jackson, what do you think America would look like?
That's a good question. So the best example I have, and it's going to sound silly, bear with me. Best example I have is him getting Martin Luther King Day to be a national holiday. And the reason it might sound silly is because that seems like amidst his accomplishment seems like a smaller thing. The thing I want to point out is that 30 years later, we had people tearing down Confederate statues. So when he got that holiday, we were building up Confederate statues, right? So to be able to do that in this era is an example, not just of a slogan, keeping hope alive, but actually practicing something, keeping this fight alive in a way that needed to exist on the plane that it existed, right? I think without Jesse Jackson, I think Catherine Tate wrote a book called From Protest to Politics in 1994, talked about moving from the Civil Rights Act and Civil Rights era into electoral politics, talked about black mayors, right? There was a surprise rise of black mayors in the 90s, a lot of political work happening. I think Jesse Jackson is central in that work, in this research. Jesse Jackson is, without him, Ron Walters, like I said, political scientist, was his campaign manager. So the idea that Jesse not being there would have been better, I think, is an overstatement, I'll say. I think that Jesse in his lane was important. Now, we don't make the rules, right? People who do electoral politics get a lot more power, get a lot more shine, get a lot more attention, right? And do I think that should be the case? No, I don't. Does it matter that somebody was in that position trying to fight for black folks? Yes. Now, to Justin's point, were a lot of black people supporting policing, supporting prisons, supporting incarceration as a means of proving that we were good enough? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Was Jesse, being a Democrat, extremely important in an era where being black and being serious meant being a Republican, like all the dads on TV? Yeah, it did matter. So, I think a lot of the ground is shifting under us at all times, and whether or not we, hit the bullseye is a question of how good your eyesight is. But I will say that without Jesse, there's some measure of direction that we just don't get. And, as simple as him being on Sesame Street, he can tell us how to get somewhere.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah, I do indeed, as I always do. I'm going to, end this conversation now, and I think this is such an appropriate comment from you, Marcus, to do just that. But I want to thank both of you, Justin Hansford, Dr. Marcus Board, for sharing your insight. This is a pivotal day. This is a pivotal time. We certainly need to remember the legacy and the life of Jesse Jackson. It is, as they say, likely that we will never see the likes of him again. I will end, however, on an excerpt from his speech at the 1998 Democratic National Convention. That is the Daily Drum for this Friday, March 6th. For News Director Renee Nash, I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.
Jesse Jackson, when my name goes in nomination, your name goes in nomination. I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me. And it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. Wherever you are tonight, you can make it. Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. It gets dark sometimes, but the morning comes. Don't you surrender. Suffering breeds character. Character breeds faith. In the end, faith will not disappoint. You must not surrender. You may or may not get there, but just know that you are qualified and you hold on and hold out. We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive.